Alexander Wolf stood at the window of his penthouse office, staring down at the city that had given him everything and nothing at all. His reflection showed a man dressed in an expensive suit, but his eyes looked tired and empty. Another boring board meeting had just ended and he was alone again. "It's always alone. Mr. Wolf, your mother is on line 1. His secretary's voice crackled through the intercom. Alexander sighed and picked up the phone. "Mother, darling, you simply must attend the charity gala tonight." Victoria Woolf's voice dripped with her usual commanding tone. "The Carltons will be there. Their daughter Jessica would be perfect for you." "I'm not interested in being matched up again," Alexander said, rubbing his temples. "I have work to do." "You're 40 years old, Alexander. It's time you settled down properly. We can't have people questioning why the CEO of Wolf Industries is still single." The same old argument. Alexander knew what his mother really meant. They needed to erase the scandal from 10 years ago, when he'd broken things off with Sophia Carter just weeks before their wedding. The society papers had talked about it for months. "I'll think about it," he said, knowing it would be easier than arguing. After hanging up, Alexander walked to the bar in his office and poured himself a drink. The amber liquid didn't taste like anything anymore. Nothing did. He loosened his tie and sat down heavily in his leather chair, the same chair where 10 years ago he'd made the biggest mistake of his life. The memory came rushing back, as fresh as yesterday. Sophia standing there in her simple blue dress, her dark hair falling around her shoulders, tears streaming down her face as she begged him to choose love over money. "Your parents don't control your life, Alex," she'd said. "We can make it on our own. I don't need their money or their approval. I just need you." But he'd been weak. His father had threatened to cut him off completely, to destroy his career before it began. The Wolfs didn't marry common girls from middle-class families. They certainly didn't marry ambitious young women who wanted careers of their own instead of playing society wife. "I'm sorry," he told her, "but this is who I am. This is my world. You'll never belong in it." The lie had tasted like ash in his mouth, because the truth was Sophia had been too good for his world, too genuine, too full of dreams and determination. While the women in his social circle competed over who had the most expensive handbag, Sophia had been working 2 jobs to put herself through business school. Alexander drained his glass and stood up abruptly. He needed to get out of this office, away from the memories. "Cancel my afternoon appointments," he told his secretary on his way out. "I'm taking a walk." The streets of Manhattan were crowded with the usual afternoon rush. Alexander walked without any real destination, letting himself get lost in the sea of faces. Sometimes he imagined seeing her in the crowd, a flash of dark hair, a familiar laugh, but it was never her. He stopped at a newsstand, his eye caught by the cover of Business Weekly. And then his heart stopped. There she was, Sophia Carter, looking more beautiful than ever in a perfectly tailored suit, her smile confident and powerful. The headline read, "Rising Star, How Sophia Carter Built a Tech Empire from Nothing." Alexander's hands shook as he bought the magazine and ducked into the nearest coffee shop. He read the article 3 times, drinking in every word. In 10 years, Sophia had done exactly what she'd always said she would. She'd started her own technology company, focusing on educational software for underprivileged schools. The company had grown exponentially, and now Carter Educational Tech was worth billions. She'd done it all without him, without his family's connections or his father's money. The article mentioned she would be speaking at the National Technology Conference next week, right here in New York. Alexander stared at her photo for a long time. The young woman he'd known was still there in her eyes, but now there was something else too. A strength, a certainty. This wasn't the girl who had begged him to choose her. This was a woman who had chosen herself. His phone buzzed, another message from his mother about the gala tonight. Alexander deleted it without reading it. For the first time, in 10 years he felt truly awake. The fog of regret and routine that had surrounded him was lifting, replaced by a singular purpose. He had to see her again. Had to try to explain, to apologize, to... what? He didn't even know. But seeing her face had cracked open something inside him that he'd spent a decade trying to keep sealed. Back in his office, Alexander called his assistant. "Get me a ticket to the National Technology Conference next week, all sessions." "But sir, You have the board retreat scheduled for those days. Cancel it. Cancel everything." After hanging up, he looked out at the city again. Somewhere out there, Sophia Carter was living the life she'd always dreamed of, the life he should have been brave enough to share with her. His mother would say he was being foolish. The old Alexander would have agreed. But he wasn't that man anymore. Or at least he didn't want to be. He picked up the magazine again, tracing her face with his finger. "I'm sorry," he whispered to the image. "I'm so sorry I was such a coward." The sun was setting over Manhattan, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. In penthouses and boardrooms across the city, the elite of New York society were preparing for another evening of pretending to care about charity while making business deals. Alexander Wolf, for the first time in 10 years, had other plans. He had a second chance, and this time he wasn't going to let fear stop him. What he didn't know was that getting Sophia to even look at him again would be the hardest battle he'd ever fought, and that the woman he'd left behind was no longer the only one with the power to break his heart. Sophia Carter took a deep breath as she looked at herself in the mirror of her hotel bathroom. Her dark hair was perfectly styled, her navy blue suit immaculate, but her hands wouldn't stop shaking. "Come on, Sophia," she whispered to herself. "It's just another conference. You've done this 100 times. But this wasn't just another conference, this was New York. His city. Her assistant, Jenny, knocked on the door. "Ms. Carter, the car is waiting downstairs." "I'll be right there," Sophia called out, straightening her shoulders. She wouldn't let thoughts of Alexander Wolf distract her. Not today, not ever again. The drive to the conference center was quiet. Sophia reviewed her speech notes, even though she knew them by heart. Her company's new educational software could help millions of underprivileged children access quality education. That was what mattered, not old heartbreaks or broken promises. "Did you see who's registered for the conference?" Jenny asked, scrolling through her tablet. Sophia's heart skipped a beat. "I don't check the attendance lists anymore. You know that." "But Ms. Carter, Alexander Wolf is..." "Jenny." Sophia's voice was firm. "I don't want to know." The young assistant fell silent, but Sophia could feel her worried glances. Everyone at Carter Educational Tech knew the story. It was impossible not to. The press had dredged it up every time her company hit a new milestone. Self-made billionaire was once jilted by society air. How heartbreak launched an empire. The headlines had been endless. The conference center was already buzzing with activity when they arrived. Sophia smiled and shook hands, discussed technology, trends, and pretended she wasn't scanning every face in the crowd. Not looking for him, she told herself, just being prepared. She was in the middle of a conversation with a potential investor when she heard his voice. Sophia. 10 years fell away in an instant. She turned slowly, her heart pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. Alexander stood there, looking exactly the same and completely different. The same tall frame, the same intense green eyes. But there were silver strands in his dark hair now, and lines around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. Alexander. Her voice came out steady, professional. All those hours practicing in front of the mirror had paid off. "I didn't expect to see you at an educational technology conference." He stepped closer. Too close. "I had to see you." The investor she'd been talking to discreetly moved away, leaving them alone in their bubble of tension. "Well, now you have," Sophia said coolly. "If you'll excuse me, I need to prepare for my keynote speech." She turned to leave, but his hand caught her arm. The touch sent electricity through her body, and she hated herself for still reacting to him after all these years. "Please," he said softly, "just have coffee with me. Let me explain." Sophia pulled her arm away. "Explain what?" "How you chose your family's money over our love. How you told me I'd never belong in your world. Or maybe you'd like to explain how you got engaged to Jessica Carlton 6 months after breaking my heart." The color drained from his face. "You know about that?" "Of course I know. It was in every society page." Sophia's laugh was bitter. "Don't worry, I didn't read them, my mother did. She called me crying, thinking it would break me all over again." "The engagement didn't last," Alexander said quickly. "I don't care," Sophia cut him off. "I really don't. That's the thing you need to understand, Alexander. I spent years caring, years wondering what I could have done differently, how I could have been enough for you and your family. But then I realized something. I was always enough. You were the one who wasn't strong enough to stand up for what we had. People were starting to stare. Sophia lowered her voice. I have a speech to give. About real things that matter. About helping children who don't have trust funds. Or family connections get the education they deserve. So please, just leave me alone. She walked away, her heels clicking against the marble floor. She didn't look back. She couldn't. In the empty hallway leading to the speaker's preparation room, Sophia finally let herself lean against the wall. Her legs were shaking. Jenny appeared with a bottle of water. Are you okay? I saw him talking to you. I'm fine, Sophia said automatically. Then she shook her head. No, I'm not fine, but I will be. I have to be. She took a long drink of water, trying to wash away the taste of memories. The way he used to look at her like she was his whole world. The plans they'd made late at night. Talking about their dreams. The moment he'd chosen his family's approval over their love. Do you want me to make sure he doesn't attend your session? Jenny asked. Sophia straightened up. No. Let him come. Let him see exactly what he walked away from. She spent the next hour reviewing her presentation, forcing herself to focus on the numbers, the statistics, the success stories of students whose lives had been changed by her software. When it was time, she walked onto the stage to thunderous applause. The lights were bright, but not bright enough to hide Alexander's face in the third row. He was staring at her with an intensity that made her skin burn. Sophia took a deep breath and began to speak. She talked about her company's mission, about the importance of equal access to education. She didn't mention how the idea had been born in those dark days after Alexander left her, when she'd thrown herself into her work to avoid thinking about him. She didn't talk about the nights she'd spent coding until sunrise, or the investors who'd laughed at her initial business plan. She didn't mention how every rejection had made her stronger, more determined to prove that a common girl could build something extraordinary. But she could see in Alexander's eyes that he understood, that he was finally seeing the full magnitude of what he'd walked away from. When the speech ended, the applause was deafening. Sophia smiled, thanked the audience, and walked off stage with her head held high. In her dressing room, she found a bouquet of white roses, her favorite. The card simply said, "You were always extraordinary. I was just too blind to deserve you." Sophia stared at the flowers for a long moment. Then she picked them up and dropped them in the trash. "Jenny," she called to her assistant. "Change my flight. We're leaving tonight instead of tomorrow." But the closing ceremony, I've said everything I needed to say. As her car pulled away from the conference center, Sophia's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Please don't run away again. Not until we've really talked. Alexander." Sophia's finger hovered over the delete button. But something stopped her. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was that tiny part of her heart that had never truly healed. Or maybe it was time to face the past so she could finally, completely move on. She put the phone away without responding. Let him wonder. Let him wait. Let him feel a fraction of what she'd felt all those years ago, because Sophia Carter wasn't that heartbroken girl anymore. She was a woman who had built an empire from the ashes of his rejection. And if Alexander Wolf wanted back into her life, he was going to have to prove he deserved even a minute of her time. Alexander sat alone in his office, staring at his phone. No response from Sophia. He'd sent the message 3 days ago, and the silence was driving him crazy. His mother had called 6 times since the conference. He ignored every call. The last thing he needed was Victoria Woolf's opinion on his embarrassing behavior at a public event. A knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. His secretary, Mrs. Reynolds, entered with a worried look on her face. "Your father is here, Mr. Wolf." Before Alexander could respond, Richard Wolf strode into the office. At 70, he still commanded attention with every step. His steel gray hair and expensive suit projected the power he'd wielded over his family for decades. "Would you care to explain why you missed the board retreat?" Richard's voice was cold. "Or why you're suddenly interested in educational technology?" Alexander stood up, matching his father's height. "I don't answer to you anymore, Dad. I haven't for years. You answer to the board and the board answers to me." Richard walked to the bar and poured himself a drink. "I saw the conference coverage. Sophia Carter. Really, Alexander? Haven't you embarrassed this family enough? Embarrassed the family?" Alexander laughed bitterly. "By falling in love with a woman who built $1 billion company from nothing. Who's changing lives while we sit in our ivory tower counting money?" Richard slammed his glass down. "Don't be naive. She built that company to spite us, to prove us wrong. And now you're falling for it like a fool." "No, Dad, I was a fool 10 years ago when I listened to you and Mom. When I threw away the best thing in my life because I was too scared to stand up to you." "We protected you," Richard growled. "That girl would have ruined you, turned you soft with all her talk about helping people and making a difference." Alexander walked to his father until they were face to face. "Get out of my office." "Excuse me?" "You heard me. Get out. And tell Mom to stop calling. I'm done letting this family control my life." Richard's face turned red. "If you pursue this, if you keep chasing after that woman, there will be consequences. Threaten me all you want. I'm not that scared kid anymore." After his father stormed out, Alexander sank into his chair. His hands were shaking, but he felt lighter than he had in years. His phone buzzed, his heart jumped, thinking it might be Sophia. But it was a news alert. Breaking: Carter Educational Tech announces major partnership with Silicon Valley giant. Alexander clicked the link. There was Sophia shaking hands with Mike Chen, CEO of Future Tech Solutions. The article mentioned a joint venture worth billions, expanding her educational software globally. He scrolled through the comments. People were calling her the next Steve Jobs, a visionary, a revolutionary. "Mr. Wolf?" Mrs. Reynolds appeared at his door again. "Your mother is on line 1. She says it's urgent. Tell her I'm in a meeting." Alexander grabbed his coat. "Actually, tell her I'm leaving early today. I have somewhere important to be." An hour later, he stood outside the Manhattan offices of Carter Educational Tech. The modern glass building was a far cry from the stuffy old architecture of Wolf Industries. "I'm sorry, sir," the receptionist said. "Ms. Carter is in meetings all day." "Please," Alexander said. "Just tell her Alexander Wolf is here. 5 minutes, that's all I'm asking." "Mr. Wolf?" A familiar voice made him turn. Jenny, Sophia's assistant, from the conference, stood there with a stack of files. Her expression was not friendly. "Ms. Carter doesn't want to see you," she said firmly. "I understand that, but I need to talk to her. Please, I'll wait as long as it takes." Jenny studied him for a long moment. "She's not here. She's at the Children's Center in Brooklyn checking on the pilot program." Alexander's heart leaped. "Which center?" "I shouldn't tell you this," Jenny sighed. "But she's at the Hope Street Center. Just don't make me regret this." 30 minutes later, Alexander's car pulled up outside a renovated brick building in Brooklyn. A colorful sign read, "Hope Street Community Center, home of the Future Tech Initiative." He heard her voice before he saw her. Sophia was sitting with a group of children, showing them something on a tablet. Her face was animated, her smile genuine as she explained the software. "See? Now you can practice these problems at home, even if you don't have a computer. The app works on any phone." A small girl raised her hand. "Miss Carter, will you come back and help us again?" "Of course I will, sweetie. Every week." Alexander watched from the doorway, his heart aching. This was the woman he'd let go. The woman who had turned her dream of helping others into reality. One of the teachers noticed him. "Can I help you?" Sophia's head snapped up at the question. Her eyes met his, and the warmth in them instantly turned to ice. "Children," she said calmly, "why don't you show Ms. Thompson what you learned today? I need to step out for a minute." She walked toward Alexander, her heels clicking on the linoleum floor. Without a word, she grabbed his arm and pulled him into an empty classroom. "Are you stalking me now?" Her voice was quiet but sharp. "I had to see you. In front of children. At my program?" Sophia's eyes flashed. "This is my safe space, Alexander. The one place I go to remember why I do what I do. How dare you come here?" "I saw the news about Future Tech Solutions," he said quickly. "The global expansion." It's amazing, Sophia. You're amazing. And stop. She held up her hand. Just stop. You don't get to congratulate me. You don't get to be proud of me. You lost that right 10 years ago. I know. Alexander stepped closer. But I want to earn it back. Please, just have dinner with me. One dinner. Let me explain everything. Sophia laughed, but there was no humor in it. Explain what? How your father threatened to cut you off. How your mother said I wasn't good enough for her precious son. I know all of it, Alexander. I wasn't blind. Then you know why I was scared. But I'm not scared anymore. No, she said softly. Now you're just desperate. Because I finally became someone your family would approve of, didn't I? Now I'm rich enough, successful enough. Funny how that works. The truth in her words hit him like a punch. That's not why... Save it. Sophia walked to the door. Go home. Alexander, go back to your world of charity galas and society marriages. I've built my own world and you're not welcome in it. She paused at the doorway. And if you ever come to one of my centers again, I'll have security remove you. Alexander watched her walk back to the children, her smile returning as if their conversation had never happened. She sat down next to the little girl who had asked her to come back, helping her with the tablet. He stood there for a long moment, seeing everything he'd thrown away. Not just the love of an incredible woman, but the chance to be part of something meaningful, something real. As he walked back to his car, Alexander made a decision. If Sophia wouldn't let him explain over dinner, he'd find another way. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number. Mike, it's Alexander Wolf. I hear you're working with Carter Educational Tech now. I have a proposition for you. In the community center. Sophia watched Alexander's car drive away through the window. Her hands were shaking again, but this time with anger. How dare he show up here in the one place she felt truly herself? Miss Carter, the little girl tugged at her sleeve. Are you okay? Sophia smiled down at her. Yes, sweetie. I'm just fine. Now let's see how well you've mastered those math problems. But as she helped the children with their lessons, a nagging voice in her head wouldn't be quiet. The way Alexander had looked at her, it wasn't the same calculating look he'd had 10 years ago. There was something different in his eyes now. Something that scared her more than his rejection ever had. Mike Chen's office at Future Tech Solutions had a view of the San Francisco Bay, but Alexander wasn't interested in the scenery. He'd flown across the country for one reason only. Let me get this straight, Mike said, leaning back in his chair. You want to invest $50 million in the Carter Educational Tech Partnership? That's right. Alexander kept his voice steady. It's a solid investment. The numbers speak for themselves. Mike smiled knowingly. The numbers aren't why you're here, Wolf. I did my homework. Everyone knows the story about you and Sophia Carter. Ancient. A history. Not so ancient from what I hear. Mike stood up and walked to his window. Word gets around, your little scene at the conference, showing up at her Brooklyn center. She's not happy about it. Alexander's jaw tightened. My interest in this project is purely business. No, it's not. Mike turned to face him. And that's why I'm going to say yes. What? Sophia Carter is brilliant. Her software could change education forever. But she needs more than money. She needs someone who believes in her vision as much as she does. Mike sat back down. The way you look when you talk about her work, that's what this project needs. Alexander let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Mike's expression turned serious. Sophia has to approve all major investors, and something tells me she's not going to be thrilled about this. Back in his hotel room that night, Alexander stared at his phone. He should call his office, deal with the mountain of work waiting for him in New York. Instead, he opened his browser and typed Sophia Carter interviews. Video after video showed her speaking about her company, her mission. In each one, she was poised, passionate, unstoppable, so different from the young woman who'd once shared her dreams with him in whispers. His phone rang. His mother's name flashed on the screen. Alexander, what is this I hear about you investing in that woman's company? Victoria's voice was shrill. Have you lost your mind? Hello to you too, Mother. Don't be smart with me. Your father is furious. The board is asking questions. What are you thinking? Alexander closed his laptop. I'm thinking it's time I did something meaningful with our money." "Meaningful?" Victoria scoffed. "By throwing millions at your ex-fiancé's pet project? That pet project is revolutionizing education for underprivileged children. But you wouldn't understand that, would you? You've never cared about anyone outside our precious social circle." "How dare you? Everything your father and I did was to protect you, to ensure your future." "No," Alexander said quietly. "Everything you did was to control me, to make sure I stayed in my golden cage like a good little heir. Well, I'm done. I'm investing in Sophia's company, and there's nothing you can do about it." He hung up before she could respond. His hands were shaking. He never talked to his mother that way. His phone buzzed with a text. It was from Mike. "Meeting with Sophia tomorrow, 9 a.m. She knows about the investment offer. Don't be late." Alexander barely slept that night. When he walked into Future Tech's conference room the next morning, Sophia was already there. She wore a red dress that made her look like fire incarnate. "No." It was the first word out of her mouth. "Sophia. Don't Sophia me." She stood up, hands flat, on the table. "How dare you try to buy your way back into my life?" "This isn't about us," Alexander said, even though it was a lie. "It's about the work you're doing, the children you're helping." "Don't." Her voice shook. "Don't you dare use those children to manipulate me." "I'm not manipulating anything. I've seen what your software can do. I've seen the faces of those kids when they realize they can learn, they can succeed. Let me help make that happen for more children." Sophia's eyes narrowed. "And what do your parents think about this generous investment?" "They hate it." Alexander smiled slightly. "They think I've lost my mind." "Maybe you have. Maybe." He took a step closer. "Or maybe I've finally found it." Sophia looked away, but not before he saw something flicker in her eyes. Doubt? Hope? He couldn't tell. "The investment comes with no strings," he said softly. "No board seat, no control over decisions, just capital to help you expand faster." "Everything with you has strings," Sophia snapped. "Everything comes with conditions and expectations and disappointment." "Not anymore." Alexander pulled a document from his briefcase. "Here's the deal. Read it, every word. You'll see. I'm not trying to take anything from you this time. I'm just trying to give something back." Sophia stared at the papers for a long moment. Then she pressed a button on the conference phone. "Jenny, come in here, please, and bring my lawyer." An hour later, Sophia's lawyer had gone through every line of the agreement. His confusion was evident. "Ms. Carter, this is unusually generous. Mr. Wolf is asking for nothing in return except quarterly reports on the program's impact." "There has to be a catch," Sophia muttered. "The only catch," Alexander said, "is that I want to visit the centers sometimes, see the work in action. No interference, just observation." Sophia's head snapped up. "You want to spend time with the children?" "I want to see what real change looks like." Alexander met her gaze steadily. "I want to understand what I was too, blind to see 10 years ago." The room was silent for what felt like hours. Finally, Sophia picked up a pen. "If you try to use this to control me, to force your way back into my life, I won't." She signed the papers, her signature bold and confident. "Don't make me regret this." As Alexander left the building, his phone rang again, his father's name on the screen. "The board is calling an emergency meeting," Richard growled. "This ridiculous investment of yours," Alexander hung up. For the first time in his life, he didn't care about his father's threats or his mother's disappointment, because he'd seen something when Sophia signed those papers. A tiny crack in the wall she'd built around her heart, a glimmer of the connection they'd once shared. It wasn't much, but it was a start. What he didn't know was that back in the conference room, Sophia was staring at his signature next to hers, remembering another piece of paper they were supposed to sign together. A marriage license that never was. "Jenny," she called to her assistant, "get me everything you can find about Wolf Industries charitable giving. I want to know if this is real or just another game." Because despite everything her head was telling, her heart remembered the way Alexander used to look at her across crowded rooms, the way he'd looked at her today, like she was still the only thing in the world that mattered. The morning headlines hit like bombs across New York's social circles. Wolfhair defies family, invests millions in ex-fiancé's company. Sophia stared at her tablet, reading article after article about Alexander's romantic gesture and bid for redemption. These people have nothing better to write about, she muttered, tossing the tablet aside. Jenny walked into her office with a stack of papers. The background check on Wolf Industries came back. You're going to want to see this. Sophia took the file and started reading. Her eyes widened. Is this accurate? Triple-checked. Jenny nodded. In the past month, Alexander has quietly sold off most of his personal assets. His penthouse, his vacation homes, his car collection. Everything except his company shares. But why would he? Ms. Carter. Her secretary's voice came through the intercom. Victoria Wolf is here to see you. Sophia's blood ran cold. She hadn't seen Alexander's mother since that terrible day 10 years ago, when Victoria had offered her a check to disappear from Alexander's life. Send her in. Victoria Wolf hadn't changed. She still wore her perfectly tailored suits and strings, half real pearls like armor. Her silver hair was expertly styled, her makeup flawless, but her eyes were cold as ever. Miss Carter. Victoria didn't wait for an invitation to sit. I assume you know why I'm here. Actually, I don't. Sophia kept her voice steady. But I'm sure you'll tell me. This little game you're playing with my son needs to stop. Sophia laughed without humor. Game? Your son came to me with a business proposition, that's all. Please. Victoria waved her hand dismissively. Alexander is throwing away everything. His reputation, his inheritance, his position in society, all to chase some romantic fantasy about the girl who got away. That's not my problem. Sophia stood up. Your son is a grown man. If he wants to invest in educational technology, that's his choice. Victoria's eyes narrowed. You've changed. The scared little girl who used to come to our house for dinner would never have spoken to me this way. You're right, I have changed. That scared little girl grew up and built something meaningful, something your family's money couldn't buy. Is that what this is about? Victoria reached for her handbag. Revenge? Proving us wrong? Well, congratulations. You've made your point. Now name your price. Sophia's heart stopped. Just like 10 years ago, Victoria Wolf was pulling out her checkbook. Get out. Excuse me? Get out of my office. Sophia's voice shook with rage. I'm not that desperate girl anymore. You can't buy me off, and you can't control Alexander by threatening to cut him off, because guess what? He's already cut himself off. Victoria's perfectly composed face cracked slightly. What? Sophia picked up the background report. He's sold everything. His homes, his cars, his art collection. He's not dependent on your money anymore. Did you know that? For the first time in her life, Sophia saw Victoria Wolf look uncertain. You're lying. Check for yourself. Your perfect son is choosing his own path. And it's killing you, isn't it? The idea that you can't control him anymore. Victoria stood up so quickly her chair nearly fell. This isn't over. Yes, it is. Sophia walked to the door and opened it. Jenny will show you out. After Victoria left, Sophia sank into her chair, trembling. Jenny rushed in with a glass of water. Are you okay? Call the car. I need to go to the Brooklyn Center. The children's laughter always calmed her. Sophia spent the afternoon helping with homework, watching kids master new concepts on her software. This was real. This mattered. Ms. Carter. One of the teachers approached her. There's someone here to see you. Sophia turned, expecting Alexander. Instead, she saw his father. Richard Wolf looked out of place in the community center, his expensive suit a stark contrast to the colorful walls covered in children's artwork. What do you want? Sophia asked tiredly. To understand. Richard's voice was quieter than she remembered. Show me what my son is investing in. Sophia studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded to one of the empty classrooms. Sit. She pulled up her software on a tablet and handed it to him. For the next hour, she explained how it worked, how it adapted to each child's learning style, how it could help students who were falling behind catch up. Richard was silent throughout her presentation. Finally, he looked up. This is why he's willing to give up everything. He's not giving up anything, Sophia said firmly. He's choosing to do something that matters. Victoria went to see you today. Yes. She offered you money to stay away from him. Just like last time. Sophia took the tablet back. It didn't work then either. Richard stood up slowly. You really loved him, didn't you? It wasn't about our money or our name. I loved him enough to let him go when he chose your world over our future. Sophia met his gaze. But I loved myself enough to build my own world without him. And now he wants to be part of your world. That's his choice. Sophia walked to the door. Just like it was his choice to leave 10 years ago. Richard reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. Sophia, before you make any decisions about my son, you should see this. Sophia took the envelope warily. What is it? Letters. One for every year since you left. He wrote them but never sent them. Richard straightened his tie. I found them in his office last week. He doesn't know I have them. After he left, Sophia stared at the envelope for a long time. Finally, she opened it with shaking hands. The first letter was dated 1 month after their breakup. Dear Sophia, I made a terrible mistake. She read until her vision blurred with tears. 10 letters, each one filled with regret, love, and pain. The last one was dated just a few months ago. I see your face everywhere. In the news, in my dreams, you've become everything you always said you would, while I'm still just a prisoner in a gilded cage. I deserve your hatred, but God help me, I still love you. Sophia's phone buzzed. A text from Alexander. I'm at the center. Can we talk? She looked at the letters in her hands, then at her phone. 10 years of unspoken words between them. Yes, she typed back. We can talk. Because maybe it was time to stop running from the past. Maybe it was time to face it head. Aunt Alexander paced outside the Brooklyn Center, his heart racing. He'd loosened his tie, rolled up his sleeves, trying to look less like the corporate robot he'd become. The sun was setting, painting the brick building in shades of orange and gold. The door opened and there she was. Sophia looked tired, her eyes slightly red. She'd been crying. Your father was here, she said without preamble. Alexander's stomach dropped. What did he want? To understand. She held up an envelope. He gave me these. Alexander's blood ran cold as he recognized his own handwriting. The letters. His father had found the letters. Sophia, 10 years. She cut him off. 10 years of letters you never sent. 10 years of regret and pain and... She took a shaky breath. Why didn't you ever send them? Because I didn't deserve forgiveness. Alexander's voice was rough. I still don't. A group of children ran past them, laughing as they headed home. Sophia watched them go, then turned back to Alexander. Come with me. She led him to her office. In the center, a small room filled with children's artwork and thank you cards, so different from his sleek corporate office tower. Sit, she commanded. Alexander sat. Sophia remained standing, the letters clutched in her hand. You wrote that you saw me everywhere, she said softly. In the news, in your dreams, that you were a prisoner in a gilded cage. I meant every word, but you stayed in that cage. Year after year you stayed. I was a coward. Alexander leaned forward. I told myself I was protecting the family legacy, doing my duty, but really I was just scared. Scared to admit I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. Sophia finally sat down, across from him. And now? Are you still scared? Terrified. He managed a small smile. But not of losing money or status or my parents' approval. I'm terrified of losing you again, of missing my last chance to make things right. Is that what this is about? The investment, showing up at my centers, you're trying to buy back my trust? No. Alexander stood up and walked to the window. I'm trying to be the man you always believed I could be, the man who cares about more than profit margins and society parties. Sophia was quiet for a long moment. I read about what you did, selling your properties, your cars. I don't need them. He turned to face her. I don't need any of it. What I need is to do something meaningful with my life, something real. And what does your mother think about that? Alexander laughed without humor. She came to see you, didn't she? With her checkbook, just like last time. I'm sorry. He took a step toward her. I'm so sorry she did that to you, both times. I'm not. Sophia stood up, squaring her shoulders. That check she offered me 10 years ago, it was the wake-up call I needed. I realized I would never be good enough for them, no matter what I did. So I decided to be good enough for myself instead. You're more than good enough, Alexander's voice cracked. You're extraordinary, and I was an idiot not to fight for you. Sophia looked down at the letters in her hands. In your last letter, you wrote that you still love me. Alexander's heart stopped. Yes, even after all these years. I never stopped. He took another step closer. I tried, God knows I tried, but no one else ever came close to you. That's not fair. Sophia's eyes filled with tears. You don't get to say these things now, not after everything. I know it's not fair, but it's the truth. Alexander was close enough now to see the tears clinging to her eyelashes. I love you, Sophia. I love your strength, your passion, your determination to make the world better. I love that you proved my parents wrong about everything. Stop. She put a hand on his chest, keeping him from coming closer. Just stop. But she didn't move away. Her hand stayed there, feeling his heartbeat through his shirt. I built this life without you, she whispered. I'm proud of who I've become. I can't let you waltz back in and mess everything up. I don't want to mess anything up. Alexander covered her hand with his. I want to help you build something, even bigger. Not as your investor or your ex or anything else, just as someone who believes in you, someone who never stopped believing in you, even when I was too weak to show it. Sophia looked up at him, and for a moment, he saw a flash of the young woman who had once loved him without reservation. I need time, she said finally, pulling her hand away. It's too much. Alexander nodded, stepping back. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere this time. She walked him to the door of the center. The street was quiet now, the last rays of sunlight fading. I have a board meeting tomorrow, Sophia said, to discuss the expansion plans. Will you be there? As an investor, Alexander smiled slightly. Only if you want me to be. Sophia seemed to struggle with herself for a moment. Then she said, Come, but sit in the back. I don't want any distractions. I'll be as invisible as possible. She almost smiled at that. Almost. As Alexander walked to his car, he felt lighter than he had in years. She hadn't forgiven him, not yet. But she hadn't sent him away either. His phone buzzed, a message from his father. We need to talk, about the letters, about everything. For the first time in his life, Alexander wasn't afraid of that conversation. Bax. In her office, Sophia sat down heavily in her chair. She pulled out the letters again, running her fingers over the familiar handwriting. Ms. Carter? Jenny appeared in the doorway. I have those reports you wanted for tomorrow's meeting. Put them on my desk. Sophia didn't look up from the letters. And Jenny, cancel my dinner plans tonight. I have some reading to do. Because maybe, just maybe, the past wasn't finished with her yet. And maybe, for the first time in 10 years, she was ready to face it. The Carter Educational Tech boardroom buzzed with excitement. Sophia stood at the head of the table presenting the global expansion plans with her usual confidence, but she was acutely aware of Alexander sitting quietly in the back corner, watching her with those intense green eyes. With the new investment, she continued, pulling up the next slide, we can roll out the program to 50 more schools by the end of the quarter. And what about the concerns over Future Tech's involvement? One of the board members asked. The press is speculating about a possible takeover. There will be no takeover, Sophia said firmly. Both Future Tech and Mr. Wolf's investment come with no strings attached. We maintain full control. She didn't look at Alexander, but she could feel him shift in his chair. After the meeting, board members crowded around her with questions and congratulations. Alexander stayed in his corner, patient, waiting. Finally, the room cleared except for them. You were amazing, he said softly. I know. Sophia started gathering her papers. That's not news. Have dinner with me. She looked up, startled by the directness of his request. Alexander, not as investors or exes or anything complicated, just dinner, real food, real conversation. Before she could answer, her phone buzzed. A text from Jenny. Urgent. Turn on the news now. Sophia grabbed the remote and switched on the boardroom's wall-mounted TV. Her heart stopped. Breaking news. Wolf Industries board votes to remove Alexander Wolf as CEO. The newsreader's voice filled the room. In a shocking move, the board of Wolf Industries has voted to remove Alexander Wolf from his position as CEO. Sources say the decision comes after Wolf's controversial investment in rival tech company Carter Educational Tech, run by his former fiancée. Sophia turned to Alexander. His face was pale but calm. "Did you know this was coming?" "I suspected." He loosened his tie. "My father's been plotting it for weeks." "But your company, your life's work." Alexander laughed, a bitter sound. "My life's work? Running a soulless corporation that cares more about profit than people? That's not work, Sophia. That's imprisonment." Her phone buzzed again. Messages were pouring in from reporters wanting comments about the situation. "This is my fault," she whispered. "No." Alexander crossed the room to her. "This is my choice. For the first time in my life, I'm choosing what's right instead of what's expected." The door burst open. Jenny rushed in, looking panicked. "Ms. Carter, reporters are swarming the building." And she hesitated. "Mrs. Wolf is downstairs causing a scene." Sophia's head snapped up. "Victoria? She's demanding to see both of you. She's threatening to tell the press about things." "What things?" Sophia demanded. Alexander's face darkened. "The real reason we broke up 10 years ago. The check she offered you, everything." Sophia felt the room spin. All these years she'd kept Victoria's attempted bribe a secret. Not to protect the Wolves, but to protect herself from the scandal, the pitying looks, the whispers. "Let her talk," Alexander said quietly. "I'm done hiding the truth." Sophia stared at him. This wasn't the same man who had chosen his family's approval over their love. This was someone new, or maybe someone who had been there all along, buried under years of expectations and fear. "Ms. Carter." Jenny was still waiting for instructions. Sophia straightened her shoulders. "Tell security to escort Mrs. Wolf out and send out a press release. Carter Educational Tech has full confidence in our investors and our mission. No further comment at this time." After Jenny left, Sophia turned to Alexander. "You just lost everything." "No." He stepped closer. 10 years ago I lost everything. Today I'm finally free." "Free to do what?" "To help you change the world." His voice was soft but sure. "To be the man I should have been back then. If you'll let me." The TV was still playing in the background, showing footage of Victoria Wolf being escorted from the building. Richard Wolf making stern statements to the press. Their perfect world was crumbling, and for once, Alexander didn't seem to care. "That dinner you mentioned," Sophia said slowly. "Is the office still open?" Alexander's eyes lit up. "Yes." "Good." She gathered her things. "Because we have a lot to talk about, starting with what you plan to do now that you're unemployed." He smiled. A real smile, not the polished one he used for business meetings. "I have some ideas. There's this amazing educational software company that might need help expanding globally." "Don't push your luck, Wolf." But she was almost smiling too. They left through the back entrance to avoid the press. In the car, Sophia's phone kept buzzing with messages and alerts. The business world was exploding with speculation about Alexander's removal, about their connection, about what it all meant. "We could leave the city for a few days," Alexander suggested. "Wait for the storm to pass." Sophia shook her head. "I don't run from storms anymore, and neither should you." He looked at her with something like awe. "When did you get so strong?" "I was always strong. You just couldn't see it through your family's prejudices." The words should have hurt him, but they didn't. Because she was right. "I see you now," he said quietly. "I see everything." They pulled up to a small Italian restaurant. Nothing fancy, nothing like the expensive places he used to take her. Through the window, they could see families eating. Dinner, couples talking, normal people living normal lives. "One dinner," Sophia said firmly. "That's all I'm promising. That's all I'm asking for." Alexander opened her door. One chance to start over. As they walked into the restaurant, Both of their phones buzzed simultaneously. New headlines were, "Breaking. Victoria Woolf makes shocking allegations about son's failed engagement. Richard Woolf steps down as chairman amid family drama. Carter Educational Tech. Stock soars despite controversy." They looked at each other, then turned off their phones. "Tomorrow," Sophia said. "We'll deal with all of it tomorrow." Because tonight was about two people trying to find their way back to each other. Not as the billionaire heir and the woman who wasn't good enough, but as Alexander and Sophia, older, wiser, and maybe, just maybe, ready to heal the wounds of the past. The hostess led them to a quiet corner table. As they sat down, their eyes met across the candlelight, and for a moment, 10 years melted away. Then Sophia opened her menu, and reality came back into focus. They weren't the same people they had been. Maybe that was a good thing. "So," she said, "tell me about these ideas you have for my company." And Alexander began to talk, his eyes bright with passion and possibility, while outside their quiet bubble, the world they'd both known continued to change forever. The morning papers were merciless. Victoria Woolf's revelations had sparked a media frenzy. Every detail of their past was being dug up and dissected. Pictures of young Sophia and Alexander were everywhere, along with the infamous check Victoria had tried to use to buy her off. Sophia sat in her apartment, surrounded by newspapers, feeling strangely calm. Her phone had been ringing non-stop since dawn. "We should release a statement," Jenny said, pacing the living room. "Get ahead of the story." "No." Sophia set down her coffee cup. "Let them talk. I have nothing to be ashamed of." Her doorbell rang. Jenny went to check and came back looking worried. "It's Richard Woolf." Sophia's calmness wavered. "Send him up." When Richard walked in, he looked older than she'd ever seen him. His usual commanding presence was diminished, his shoulders slumped under his expensive suit. "I came to apologize," he said without preamble. Sophia gestured for him to sit. Jenny quietly left the room. "Victoria should never have gone to the press," Richard continued. "What she did, revealing private matters, it was unforgivable. But you're not just here to apologize for your wife, are you?" Richard shook his head slowly. "No, I'm here because I need your help." Sophia almost laughed. "My help? After everything your family did to me?" "Alexander won't answer my calls. He's completely cut ties with us. The company is in chaos, the board is divided, and our reputation," he trailed off. "And you think I can fix this?" "I think you're the only one who can." Richard leaned forward. "You've built something remarkable, Sophia. Something real. Alexander sees that. He's changed because of you. He changed because he finally chose to be himself instead of what you wanted him to be." Richard was quiet for a moment. "Perhaps you're right. But the company, it employs thousands of people. Good people, who don't deserve to suffer because of our family's mistakes." Before Sophia could respond, her phone buzzed with a text from Alexander. "Turn on the business news." She grabbed the remote. The TV showed Alexander standing at a podium, looking confident in a simple blue suit. No tie, no pretense. "For too long, Woolf Industries has been focused solely on profit," he was saying. "Today I'm announcing the creation of the Woolf Foundation for Educational Innovation. I'm pledging half of my personal shares in the company to fund educational programs for underprivileged children across the country." Richard made a choked sound. "He can't do this." "He already has." Sophia couldn't help smiling. "He's finally doing something that matters." Her phone rang. "Alexander, did you see?" he asked when she answered. "I saw. Your father's here." A pause. "What does he want?" "Help. The company's in trouble." "Let it fall," Alexander said firmly. "We can build something better from the ashes. Another pause. I didn't mean to presume." "Come over," Sophia said suddenly. "Both of you need to hear what I have to say." 30 minutes later, Alexander arrived. The tension between father and son was thick enough to cut with a knife. "Sit down, both of you," Sophia commanded. They sat, these two powerful men who had once controlled her fate, now waiting for her words. "Here's what's going to happen," she began. "Carter Educational Tech will partner with the Woolf Foundation. We'll integrate our programs into a complete educational platform. But there are conditions." She looked at Richard. First, you and Victoria. Step down from all operational roles in Wolf Industries. The company needs new leadership, new ideas. Richard opened his mouth to protest, but she held up her hand. Second, the board will be restructured. Half the seats will go to educators, community leaders, and people who actually understand what children need to succeed. The shareholders will never agree, Richard argued. They will when they see the potential. Sophia turned to Alexander. Which brings me to you. Alexander met her gaze steadily. Name your conditions. If we do this, if we merge our visions, it has to be real. No hidden agendas, no power plays, just honest work to make education better for every child. That's all I want, Alexander said softly. And us? Richard asked. What happens to Victoria and me? Sophia's expression softened. Slightly. You get to be grandparents someday if you're lucky. Nothing more, nothing less. Your days of controlling everything are over. The room was quiet as her words sank in. Finally, Richard stood up. You've become quite formidable, Miss Carter. I always was, Mr. Wolf. Your family just couldn't see it. After Richard left, Alexander stayed in his chair, looking at Sophia with wonder. You're giving me a chance to fix my father's company. I'm giving you a chance to build something new. She sat across from him. Something that would make that idealistic young woman I used to be proud. And what about us? His voice was hesitant. Where do we stand? Sophia thought about the past few weeks. The letters, the conversations, the quiet dinner where they'd talked until the restaurant closed. We start over, she said finally. Not as the poor girl and the rich heir, not as the successful CEO and the fallen prince. Just as two people trying to do something good in the world. Alexander stood and walked to her window, looking out at the city. I don't deserve this second chance. Maybe not. Sophia joined him at the window. But those kids were going to help. They deserve every chance we can give them. He turned to face her, and suddenly they were very close. I still love you, he said quietly. I need you to know that isn't about business or redemption or anything else. I just love you. Sophia felt tears in her eyes. I know. But love isn't enough on its own. We need trust, honesty, equality. Then we'll build those too. Alexander smiled slightly. We're good at building things now, aren't we? Before she could respond, her phone buzzed. Another news alert. Breaking. Carter Educational Tech and Wolf Foundation announce historic partnership. They looked at each other in surprise. How did they know? Alexander asked. Jenny, they said in unison and laughed. The sound of their shared laughter seemed to break something in the air between them. Sophia reached for his hand, and Alexander took it, squeezing gently. Outside, reporters were probably already gathering. Victoria was probably plotting her next move. The business world was probably exploding with speculation. But in that moment, none of it mattered. Because two people who had lost their way had finally found a path back to each other, not through wealth or power or society's approval, but through a shared dream of making the world a little better. 6 months had passed since the announcement of the partnership between Carter Educational Tech and the Wolf Foundation. Autumn had turned to winter, and snow fell softly outside the windows of the Brooklyn Center. Sophia watched as Alexander sat on the floor with a group of children, helping them with their math problems on the tablets. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his hair slightly messy, but his smile was real. Mr. Alex, a little girl named Maria tugged at his sleeve. I got it right. You sure did. Alexander high-fived her. See? Fractions aren't so scary after all. Sophia's heart squeezed. This was the man she'd always known was hiding behind the corporate mask. This was the Alexander she'd fallen in love with all those years ago. Ms. Carter, Jenny appeared at her side. The reporters are here for the 1-year anniversary celebration. Right. The press conference. They were announcing the expansion of their program to 500 more schools across the country. Tell them we'll be right there. Alexander looked up and caught her eye. He said something to the children and stood up, brushing off his pants. Ready for this? He asked, walking over to her. Almost. She reached up and straightened his tie. Now you look like a proper education advocate. His hand caught hers before she could pull away. Sophia. Not now, she whispered. We have work to do. The past 6 months had been a delicate dance between them, working together, rebuilding trust, trying to ignore the spark that still flickered whenever they got too close. The press conference room was packed. Sophia took her place at the podium with Alexander beside her. "1 year ago," she began, "we had a dream of bringing quality education to every child, regardless of their background. Today, I'm proud to announce that dream is becoming reality." She went through the numbers: test scores improving, dropout rates falling, children discovering a love of learning through their program. But none of this would have been possible, she continued, without the vision and support of our partners, including someone who reminded me that it's never too late to learn, to grow, to become better. She glanced at Alexander, who was watching her with those intense green eyes. After the press conference, they escaped to her office. The celebration party wouldn't start for another hour. "That was quite a speech," Alexander said, loosening his tie. "I meant every word." Sophia sat on the edge of her desk. "You have changed, Alexander. This isn't just some redemption project for you anymore." "It never was." He stepped closer. "It was about becoming the man you always saw in me. The man I wanted to be, but was too scared to become. And now I'm not scared of anything." His voice was soft. "Except losing you again." Before she could respond, there was a knock at the door. Jenny poked her head in. "Sorry to interrupt, but Victoria Woolf is here." Sophia and Alexander exchanged looks. They hadn't seen his mother since the day she'd gone to the press with their story. "Send her in," Sophia said. Victoria entered, looking thinner than before, less polished. The past months had clearly taken their toll. "Mother." Alexander's voice was cool. "What brings you here?" Victoria's usual confidence faltered. "I watched your press conference on TV, and I was wrong." The words seemed to cost her. "About everything. About both of you." Sophia stayed quiet, watching this proud woman struggle with humility. "The work you're doing," Victoria continued, "it's remarkable. Those children, their faces when they understand something new." She took a shaky breath. "I never understood before why education mattered so much to you, Sophia. Why Alexander was willing to give up everything for this. But now you do?" Sophia couldn't keep the skepticism from her voice. "I'm trying to." Victoria pulled something from her purse, an old photograph. "I found this while packing up the house. We're selling it, moving somewhere smaller." The photo showed young Alexander reading to a group of children at a charity event. He couldn't have been more than 16. "You were always meant for this," Victoria said softly to her son. "I just couldn't see it through my own ambitions for you." Alexander took the photo, his expression unreadable. "I don't expect forgiveness," Victoria continued, "from either of you. But I wanted you to know, I'm proud of what you've built. Together." She turned to leave, then paused. "And Sophia, thank you for seeing in my son what I was too blind to see." After she left, the office was quiet. Alexander stared at the old photograph, lost in thought. "Are you okay?" Sophia asked softly. "I don't know." He looked up at her. "All these years, I wanted them to understand. Now that they do, it doesn't magically fix everything." "No," he set the photo down, "but maybe it's a start." Sophia moved closer, drawn by the vulnerability in his eyes. "Your mother's right about one thing," she said. "You were always meant for this. Teaching, helping, making a difference." "We were meant for this," he corrected. "Together." The word hung between them, heavy with meaning. "Alexander, I know, we're taking things slow, rebuilding trust, being professional." "Very professional," she agreed, even as she stepped closer. "Absolutely professional," he murmured, his hand finding her waist. The knock on the door made them jump apart. "Ms. Carter," Jenny called. "The celebration is starting. Everyone's waiting." Sophia smoothed her dress, trying to calm her racing heart. "Should go. Wait." Alexander caught her hand. "Have dinner with me tonight. No work talk, no foundation business. Just us." Sophia looked at their joined hands, thinking of all the reasons she should say no. They were finally in a good place professionally. The foundation was thriving. Why risk complicating things? But then she looked in his eyes and saw what she'd always seen there. Love, hope, and now something new. Wisdom earned through hard lessons. "Yes," she said softly. His smile lit up his whole face. "But right now," she added, pulling her hand away, "so we have a room full of teachers, students, and supporters waiting to celebrate our success." "Our success," he repeated, like he couldn't quite believe it. They walked to the party together, not touching but close enough to feel the electricity between them. The room was filled with faces they'd come to know over the past year. Teachers, students, parents, all part of the community they'd built. Maria, the little girl from earlier, ran up to them. "Miss Carter, Mr. Alex, look what I made." She held up a drawing of two stick figures standing in front of a building labeled school. Between them was a big red heart. Sophia and Alexander looked at each other over the child's head, both fighting back smiles. Sometimes the simplest truths come from the purest hearts. The restaurant was the same small Italian place where they'd had their first dinner 6 months ago. This time Sophia arrived first, her heart beating faster as she waited. The door chimed and Alexander walked in, carrying a small package wrapped in simple brown paper. "Sorry, I'm late," he said, sliding into the seat across from her. "Had to. Pick something up. What's that? Open it." Sophia unwrapped the package carefully. Inside was a leather-bound book. When she opened it, she found photographs, newspaper clippings, and handwritten notes chronicling the past year of their work together. "Jenny helped me put it together," Alexander explained. "Every milestone, every success, every moment that brought us here." Sophia turned the pages slowly. There were pictures of children using their software, the opening of new learning centers, celebrations with teachers and families, and scattered throughout were moments between them, subtle glances, shared smiles, the gradual rebuilding of something they'd thought was lost forever. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Turn to the last page." She did. There, carefully preserved, was the drawing Maria had given them at the celebration party, the stick figures with the heart between them. Out of the mouths of babes, Alexander said softly, "Alexander, let me say this, please." He reached across the table and took her hand. "For the past year, we've been partners, colleagues, maybe even friends. We've built something amazing together. But Sophia, I want more." She started to speak, but he squeezed her hand. "I'm not the same man who let you go 10 years ago. You're not the same woman who begged me to choose love over money. We've both grown, changed, become stronger. But one thing hasn't changed. I love you. I never stopped loving you." Tears filled Sophia's eyes. "I know. I never stopped either. Then, maybe it's time we stopped pretending this is just about business or redemption or anything else." Alexander's voice was gentle. "Maybe it's time we admitted that some love stories deserve a second chance." The waiter approached their table, but one look at them and he quietly backed away. "What about the foundation?" Sophia asked. "The work we're doing?" "It continues, gets bigger, better, but now maybe we do it not just as partners, but as..." "As what?" Alexander stood up and moved to her side of the table. Then, to her shock, he got down on one knee. "Alexander, what are you doing? What I should have done 10 years ago, choosing love and purpose over fear and expectation." He pulled out a small box. "This isn't the giant diamond my mother insisted on last time. It's simpler, real, like what we've built together." He opened the box to reveal a beautiful but understated ring. "Sophia Carter, will you marry me? Not because of business or family expectations or anything else. Just because I love you, and I want to spend the rest of my life building dreams with you." The restaurant had gone silent. Everyone was watching them, but Sophia barely noticed. All she could see was Alexander's eyes, clear, honest, full of love and hope. "Yes," she whispered. Then louder, "Yes." The restaurant erupted in applause as Alexander slipped the ring on her finger and pulled her into a kiss. Later that night, they walked through the snowy streets hand in hand. "We should stop by the center," Sophia said suddenly. "Now? It's closed. I have a key. There's something I want to show you." The Brooklyn Center was quiet and dark, but Sophia led him confidently through the halls to her office. She went to her desk and pulled out a folder. "What's this?" "Open it." Inside, Alexander found papers, old ones, yellowed with age. His breath caught as he recognized them. "My letters," he whispered. "The ones my father gave you." "Not just those." Sophia pulled out another stack. "These are my letters, the ones I wrote to you but never sent." Alexander stared at her. "You wrote to me too?" "Every year, just like you did." She smiled softly. "I guess we were both holding on to hope even when we thought we'd lost everything." He began to read, his hands shaking slightly. "Dear Alexander, today I signed the papers to start my company. Part of me wishes you were here to share this moment, but another part knows I had to do this on my own. Dear Alexander, the first school adopted our program today. You should have seen the children's faces when they realized they could learn, at their own pace, in their own way. Dear Alexander, I saw you in the papers today. Another business success, another society event. You looked lonely, or maybe that's just what I wanted to see." When he looked up, there were tears in his eyes. "All these years," he said roughly, "we were writing to each other, missing each other, loving each other from afar. Maybe we needed that time," Sophia said, "to become who we are now, to be ready for this." She gestured around the office at the children's artwork on the walls, the thank you cards from parents, the evidence of dreams made real. "Together," Alexander said, pulling her close. "Together," she agreed. Outside, snow continued to fall on the quiet Brooklyn street. Inside the center, two people who had lost and found each other held on tight, surrounded by the proof that love, like education, like dreams, like hope itself, never truly dies. It just waits for the right moment to bloom again. And somewhere, in a drawer of her desk, a young girl's drawing of two stick figures and a heart watched over it all, reminding them that sometimes the greatest truths are the simplest ones. Love, when it's real, finds its way back home. The next morning, Sophia and Alexander would return to their work, to their mission of changing lives through education. They would face new challenges, new obstacles, new victories, but they would face them together. Not as the poor girl and the rich heir, not as the successful CEO and the fallen prince, but as two people who had learned life's greatest lesson. True love, like true purpose, is worth fighting for, worth waiting for, worth believing in, even if it takes 10 years to get it right.